In 1960, close to 90% of American households had a television, but what they didn't have was freedom. I mean, they had civil rights and stuff, or at least some of them did, I don't remember. But what I'm talking about is the important kind of freedom. The freedom to watch whatever you want on TV. Televisions at the time could still only play whatever they were picking up over the air. There was no device that could play a movie or a television show on demand, and there wasn't even a way you could own a movie unless you ran a movie theater. But behind the scenes, there was a technology race to solve the problem, to create a format for owning and watching videos at home. The format that won this race in the end was the VHS tape, a familiar and ubiquitous icon that lasted decades, but today, we're not talking about winners. We are going to be talking about losers. And specifically, this loser, the SelectaVision video disc. If you think this looks kind of like a vinyl record, the kind you'd pick up at a record store and conspicuously hang on your dorm room wall despite the fact that you evidently don't own a record player, you'd be correct. For a very brief period in the 1980s, you could buy movies on vinyl. And if you're wondering why you didn't already know that, it probably has something to do with the fact that the SelectaVision video disc is one of the least reliable media formats ever invented, sold almost no units, and in the end, single-handedly bankrupted one of the largest electronics companies in the history of the world. This is RCA. You might recognize it as the logo that sometimes goes on this part of the really cheap smart TV you bought at Walmart, but at one point in history, they actually mattered. They were the company that brought radios into people's homes, almost single-handedly invented color television, and are responsible for creating NBC. But the thing that brought this titan down was the SelectaVision video disc, their short-lived and desperately dysfunctional answer to VHS. But to explain why trying to play a movie using technology that was invented in 1877 is not such a great idea, we need to explain how the technology works in the first place. Vinyl is pretty simple. Etched into the surface of the disc is one super long, super tight spiral. One end of the spiral is the start of the data, and the other end of the spiral is the end of the data. Now, in the case of a music disc, this spiral just needs to contain the information for one simple thing, a sound wave. And in order to do that, we can just make the spiral be the sound wave. If you really zoom in, you'll see that the etching varies in depth, going up and down as it spirals towards the center. So when you place the needle of the record player on top of the disc and it follows the spiral from one end to the other, the needle will bob up and down and recreate the sound wave that's been etched into the disc. If you want to get really fancy with it, you can actually pretty easily squeeze a second sound wave into the spiral by also having it wiggle a little bit back and forth. That way, the depth up and down represents one sound wave, and the sway back and forth represents the other sound wave. You can use this to create right and left channels if you want stereo audio, or, in the case of half as interesting short-lived and financially dubious vinyl run, you can play two separate tracks of me explaining fun facts to you in each ear for double the learning and double the fun. Now, the main problem with trying to shove an entire movie-length video into this single wiggly line is you kinda can't. Of course, it is totally possible to encode a video signal in a single wave. That's how analog televisions work in the first place. The problem is that video signals contain a lot more information than just plain audio signals, because it's got to tell you if there's a guy and what the guy is doing and what the guy looks like, you know, how videos work. If you try to encode video onto a normal vinyl record, with the amount of wiggly line you have available to you, you would be able to squeeze about 90 or so seconds of a movie onto one side of that record, which is good enough for a TikTok and not a lot else. So to put this in a way that's going to get a lot of people in the comments really mad at me, to get more video on the record, you need more squiggly line. A lot more squiggly line. And not to simplify a decade and a half of research and development, but that's basically what they did. A normal vinyl record would be etched with about 300 grooves per inch, and if you were to stretch the spiral from end to end, you're looking at about a third of a mile of wiggly line total. A SelectaVision video disc, on the other hand, is about 30 times denser, 9,541 grooves per inch, and about 12 miles of wiggly line in the same amount of space. That meant that they could fit 60 minutes of film on either side of the record, and it only came at the expense of putting out a piece of technology that didn't work and wasn't marketable. But before we get into all the very obvious reasons that this format failed, it's worth pointing out that these video discs did have advantages over their competition when they came to market. For one, they were a little cheaper to produce than VHS tapes. And that's it. That's the whole list. Now let's talk about why they suck. Because the grooves in the SelectaVision discs were so small, so sensitive, and had basically zero redundancy, you could destroy them by doing almost anything. Touching them with your hands, destroyed. Single particle of dust, destroyed. Putting them in a disc player and playing them as intended, believe it or not, destroyed. RCA estimated that even under perfect conditions, these discs could not survive being played more than 500 times, and the quality of the video would degrade with every single play. And keeping them in perfect condition was itself part of the headache. Because you couldn't touch these discs or expose them to particles, the discs had to be kept at all times inside these thick plastic sleeves, which could only be taken off once the disc was already inside the player. That meant that you also had to reinsert the sleeve halfway through every movie so that you could take the disc out, flip it over, reinsert it, and then take the sleeve out again, which only got you another 60 minutes of video. So any movie longer than 2 hours was either never on SelectaVision, or the studio was forced to cut out scenes altogether to get the movie short enough to fit on a failed system that no one wanted. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering how these video discs ever even entered the home video format wars, because in retrospect, it's not much of a shock that they were dead on arrival. The answer doesn't make RCA look a lot smarter, but there is an answer. You see, when RCA first started developing these discs in 1964, they were arguably not a bad idea. Magnetic tape, like the type you'd eventually find in VHS or Betamax cassettes, did already exist, but it was hugely expensive and couldn't be cheaply or efficiently mass-produced. But you know what could? Vinyl records. And next to books, vinyl records were the only storage medium that, by the 1960s, had been reliably produced at that scale. So they took the safe route and decided to stick with a medium that had been proven to work. The only problem is that that safe route took 17 years. RCA wasn't actually able to fit 60 minutes of video onto one of these records until 1981, at which point VHS tapes had been invented, brought to market, and sold by none other than RCA itself, who, to make matters even worse, had also stolen their own branding and were already calling their VCR a SelectaVision. So should they have just put the video disc out of its misery at this point? Yeah, probably, but one variable remained true. These discs were still cheaper to mass produce than VHS tapes. So RCA thought, hey, these things suck, but if we get them to market, poor people will love them. And sure, buying a new VHS tape in the 1980s might have run you somewhere between $80 to $100, whereas one of these discs would only cost about $20. But here's the thing. No one was buying VHS tapes in the first place. Home video was developing primarily into a rental market because, let's face it, how many times do you really need to watch Smokey and the Bandit Part 3 anyway? Smokey doesn't even show up in this one. They might have all just called it Smokey and Jerry Reed slowly asphyxiating career. You know what? Never mind. The point is, RCA brought the video disc to market knowing that it was pretty bad, but hoping that people would rather own cheap movies than rent expensive ones. A mistake that ultimately cost them $650 million in ownership of their company. The moral: never bet against Blockbuster, an American institution that can never fail. Okay, once again, you have made it to the end of one of my videos that's just a dry explanation of an outdated storage medium, so I've decided to award you with a Sam's Outdated Storage Medium Explanation Fan Club membership pin. And as a member of this illustrious club, having proven that you can tolerate a nerd saying facts at you, I would recommend checking out Nebula. For those of you out of the loop, Nebula is an independent streaming service that I started with some of my creator friends, and it turns out people actually kind of like it. Our idea was to give both creators and their audiences a better deal. No ads, bigger budgets, no algorithm calling the shots. That idea became Nebula, and Nebula became a huge success. We have some of the most engaged users in all of streaming, meaning people who sign up for Nebula really use it and really love it. It was the incubator for Jetlag the Game, where we developed an exclusive pilot season called Crime Spree to test out the concept before bringing it to YouTube. It's also where I publish longer passion projects of mine, like our documentary about the remote airport of St. Helena, or our new show about the logistics of things like commercial fishing or search and rescue. And it's home to a rapidly growing list of other creators like Real Engineering, Not Just Bikes, Philosophy Tube, and Johnny Harris, many of whom are developing their own slate of amazing original content just for Nebula. Signing up for Nebula not only gets you access to this massive library of content, but it's also a great way to support independent creators like myself and all these other folks going by. All you need to do is go to nebula.tv/HAI, and you'll even get 40% off an annual plan, which brings the monthly cost down to under $3 a month.